Logan here, back in the shop after the 4th of July weekend. Got a little sun, as you can see. Hope you guys had a good 4th of July weekend. So, want to jump back on to our choices series and move into choice number 2. Before I do that though, I want to take a quick step back and go over something that I kind of missed in the last video. As you can see, we still have our classes board here. It looks like a tic-tac-toe game right now, but I'll explain this here in a minute. One thing I didn't cover was trailers. So, according to these classes, at some point, you're not really going to be driving these trucks to the track anymore. So trailers is something to consider. In ET bracket, you can totally drive your vehicle to and from the track. 770, you can pretty much drive it to and from the track. When you get that into 670, that's where you're at the limit to where, okay, it's smart to bring a trailer. Even though you might have a totally capable street truck that you drive all the time, when you are drag racing these things break, things do happen. So in my opinion, 670 is where you need to start looking to a trailer, and then 590 and beyond, for sure, have to have a trailer. So that's just something that I felt like I missed in the last video. Just want to take a quick second to cover it in this one before we jump into the second round of choices. So now that you've decided what class that you're going to enter for your budget, the next thing that you need to look into is, what are you going to build? Like I said before, I'm a Cummins guy, so we're talking strictly Cummins here. So we're talking Dodge platform stuff. It's not limited to this, it's just for this video, this is what we're talking about. So if you are building a new vehicle, the first thing that you need to know is two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. It doesn't matter what you do, every option that you're about to be faced with from this point on forward, you are going to be dealing with bullshit. If you don't know what I mean by that, go to Chief and Sean show, episode 48, and give that a listen to, and they do a good job of explaining dealing with your bullshit. But basically, everything has a pro, everything has a con. You have to decide what bullshit that you want to deal with out of that. So, two-wheel drive. These X's here represent what I feel like the two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, 12-valve common rail. These X's represent what I feel like is a good fit for this class. A two-wheel drive will fit in any class. You can run ET bracket, 770, 670, 590, Pro Street, Pro Mod. Two-wheel drive is going to have you covered for that. The four-wheel drive is going to be a perfect fit for ET, 770, 670, 590. When you get into Pro Street, that's still pretty much a four-wheel drive class right now, but that's one of those classes that I feel like a two-wheel drive is a benefit. So I have it on Pro Street, but really two-wheel drive is probably a little bit better. And then Pro Mod is two-wheel drive. That's not a four-wheel drive class. These guys are running 3s, 420s, 4.0s. You've got to be able to go that fast, and you're not going that fast in a four-wheel drive, not with a diesel. So two-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive. Up here at your more entry-level classes, I'm picking a four-wheel drive. All the way to 670, I'm 100% picking a four-wheel drive. If four-wheel drive is in ET or 770, you can do it on street tires. It's very hard to make a two-wheel drive truck hook on a hard tire, on a street tire. So that's the bullshit you deal with a two-wheel drive at that level, is you have to figure out a way to make it hook. If you can't, then you're talking about running slicks or radials, and then if it's one of these trucks that you're driving to the track, now you're bringing tires to the track, you're swapping back and forth. So in my opinion, four-wheel drive is 100% your best option for ET, 770, and even 670. If you have a low horsepower engine and you don't necessarily have the budget to build a higher horsepower engine, and you want to build, say, an S10 to run 670 with, then two-wheel drive totally makes sense for that. It's just a matter of, you're back to swapping tires when you get to the track, because you're not driving on the track on slicks. So you've got some stuff that you have to deal with there. moving into 590. 590 is predominantly a four-wheel drive class, but the Mindy Jackson, won a championship with her two-wheel drive because big tire two-wheel drive is deadly consistent. You don't necessarily have to worry as much about changing track conditions. You're already over-tired as it is. So there's definitely something to think about there with two-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive in 590. Me personally, I like that 590 looks like a truck still, looks like a street truck. To me, a truck is four-wheel drive, but there's a lot of guys, David Large, Rod McMaster, two-wheel drive guys doing very well in this class. So 590, two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, you're gonna be in good shape on that stuff. I get a lot of questions about transfer cases. Transfer cases isn't an area where you really need to spend any money. A stock Dodge transfer case is very strong. You can make 2,500 horsepower on a factory transfer case, so I wouldn't let that part of it deter you. And then moving into Pro Street, that's still predominantly a four-wheel drive class right now, but that is a good class where I would say if I was building a Pro Street truck, I like four-wheel drives. My stuff would have to be four-wheel drive, but it would be smart to have a two-wheel drive truck just for the same reasons as 590. The two-wheel drive, you're not wasting as much horsepower. A four-wheel drive, you are losing horsepower through the drive line. You got to turn a transfer case, a front axle, front drive shaft. You are giving up horsepower there. It's just a matter of what class and what situation you're in to determine if it's worth it or not. And then Pro Mod, 100% two-wheel drive. Like I said, you got to run 420s to be competitive in that class, or threes. Some of these guys have been threes on radials. So that's a two-wheel drive. So pretty much that's how I would determine between a two-wheel drive and a four-wheel drive. It's kind of what you like and kind of what you're doing and kind of what bullshit you're willing to deal with. Moving into engine combinations. There are a ton of different engine combinations. Once again, this is Cummins strictly, so I don't know anything about the Fords or the Chevys. ET 770, you could pretty much run whatever. You could run like an ET, you could run a VE 12 valve, you could probably run a VE 12 valve in 770 if it's in the right vehicle. You could run a VP 44 in either of those classes. You could run a common rail, you could run a 12 valve. Like ET 770, you can pretty much build any Cummins engine to run that fast. When you get into 670, you can still use pretty much all those combinations. I think the VE would pretty much be out unless you were just making the thing run on nitrous basically. But same deal, you could make, given that you pick the right vehicle for your power plant, you're not going to take a four-door long bed truck, third gen, and put a VP 44 in it and run 670 very easily. That would be pretty tough. But you can run pretty much any of what you have now, all the way up to 670, depending on, how much money you want to spend, what you want to deal with, that kind of thing. 590 and up is where you're talking, in my opinion, P-pump 12 valves and common rail motors. Not saying you can't run 590 with some crazy exotic VP setup or something, but typically we're talking P-pumps and common rails from this point on. Pro Street, you could run a 12 valve, and you could be competitive. A 12 valve does make horsepower. There's not many of them left anymore because of how easy the common rail stuff is, but you could do it with a 12 valve. The bullshit you're going to deal with a 12 valve is that they are harder to spool big turbos, so you are going to be thinking a lot about your transmission. You're going to be thinking a lot about your converter setup. If you have some really radical 12 valve engine, you might even be talking clutch setups at that point, just to be able to get those things spooled up. The common rail is just easy in the sense of there's a lot of people that can tune it. There's a lot of people that can give you advice. there's just a vast of information out there for the common rail stuff when you get into this level. And then Pro Mod, I'm considering that a common rail only class. Warren County is running a mechanical engine in Pro Mod. It can be done, but like I said before, you're back to really thinking about your transmission setup, trying to figure out if you need a converter or a clutch. If you're going to run a converter, is it going to be able to be loose enough to spool the turbos, and then is it going to be worth the crap down track? It's just a lot of dealing with that kind of stuff. And the other thing about the mechanical side of things is there's not many guys that do it anymore. Scheid does an excellent job at it. They've been doing it for years. In my opinion, they're the best in the business when it comes to mechanical stuff. There are other companies out there that make parts, good mechanical parts, but you're pretty much going to be leaning on those guys for a lot of the tunability. And outside of that, you're going to be figuring it out on your own. You're going to be putting in work, doing spool ups, playing with AFCs, and you might be swapping injectors. You might be, changing cams. It depends on how hard you want to work and how committed you are to that power plant to make it happen. I believe you can, but you're going to have to put in a lot more work. The common rail is going to be less work on your end, but more investment in having outside help. That's one thing that I think the 12 valve shines from a common rail, is that the 12 valve, you can handle it on your own. You don't have to have a remote tuner that you're relying on. Hey, I'm going to the track and this guy's busy and he can't get you tunes because he's got a life too and he's got other customers. And so you really have to pre-plan your track outings and everything when you're talking common rail. And specifically at these higher levels, a 670 truck and below, once you get a tune that works for you, you just stick with that. You're not really changing RPM limiters up and down. You're not really you're not playing with the tuning as much as you would be with some of these higher classes here. Sorry, I just realized that my AC unit was on, so I hope the first part of this video, the sound quality doesn't suck. My bad. So, you're relying on a tuner a lot. If you're gonna do, from my experience, if you're 590 and above, and you know that you're going testing a week before, 2 weeks beforehand, and you're a common rail guy, give your tuner as much time as possible. Let them know, say, hey, I'm going to the racetrack on Friday, and this could be the Thursday or the Wednesday beforehand. So giving them at least a week. And my rule of thumb is just give them at least a week of time to be able to assist you. So that way, if they need to change something in their schedule or whatever it may be, they have time to help you. Don't call your tuner on Friday night and say, hey, I'm at the racetrack. I need 500 more RPM on the limiter. You might have a tuner that could help you, but that's asking a lot of anybody. So try to really pre-plan that. And with the 12 valve thing, you don't have to put that much forethought into it necessarily, just because if you go to the track and I need more RPM on the limiter, that's a mechanical adjustment that you can make yourself. So definitely pros and cons there. The pros in any class of a common rail is that they are a lot easier to run cleaner. Smoke is a big complaint with a lot of these tracks. I think the industry has gotten good enough now, and we have come far enough now to where it's not so much a problem anymore because trucks are just running cleaner now. But the common rail does have advantages there. It is a cleaner burning setup. And because it's cleaner burning, it atomizes fuel better. They're more fuel efficient. These big mechanical motors, we might burn 1 to 2 gallons of fuel per pass, and you can make 3 or 4 passes on a common rail with the same amount of fuel. So that's another factor to consider. And just the overall accessibility of common rail parts. There's tons of big companies out there making good quality parts for common rails, and with the 12 valve stuff, you're kind of limited to just a handful of guys that make really good stuff, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it is nice to have that wealth of knowledge in the common rail world to be able to lean on one way or another. So just to kind of recap, ET 770, 670, run whatever power plant you want. I'm a 12 valve guy. It's hard to say I'm a 12 valve guy. I am, but I like common rails too. I think they both have their place. There's absolutely benefits of both. But for me, if I had a 12 valve, I'd run it in any class up to 590. If I had a common rail, I'd run that in any class up to 590. If two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, these lower classes, I'm going four-wheel drive just so I don't have to worry about swapping tires. It just the repeatability. The one thing that people miss with the two-wheel drive stuff is the absolute necessity of a trans brake. When you can foot brake a two-wheel drive ET and 770, you can foot brake it. When you get into trying to run, faster like this 670 with a two-wheel drive, a trans brake is a must. When you foot brake a chassis, you have it bound up. The chassis is trying to be loaded while it's sitting there on the starting line, and then when you release the brakes, it makes everything very unhappy. It makes the tire unhappy, and you have nothing but problems. They bounce, they want to go one way or the other. You can take a two-wheel drive truck that won't go down the track very well and just put a trans brake on it and fix it a lot of times. So this is trans brake on two-wheel drive. So that's something else that you have to consider. What kind of transmission you're going to run. Is the transmission that you're going to run trans brake capable? All the 47, 48 stuff we do them all the time. Turbo 400 stuff is obviously trans brake capable. Some guys have been swapping not really Allisons. Like I've seen a 4L80 swap. I've seen some 4R swaps. I've heard that there's some trans brake options for 4Rs, but I don't know how figured out that is. That's something to really consider because trans brakes are not all created equal. There are some trans brakes that are really good. There are some trans brakes that are not so good. And that is the difference between possibly breaking parts. It's the difference between your bump box working good if you need to use one. It's the difference between cutting a light good or not. So really consider, if you're going to build a two-wheel drive, really consider your transmission options and the trans brake side of it. The four-wheel drive, you can get away without a trans brake pretty far, honestly. Like you could almost run Pro Street without a trans brake. There are a couple guys doing it. Pretty sure Turbo Tom doesn't have a trans brake. I think he's foot braking his still, and he's been 520s. So I think that the trans brake thing's not super necessary on the four-wheel drives until you get into like manual brakes where you don't have the holding power, and you're always going to be able to 60 foot better with a trans brake than you are a foot brake. So if you're trying to get every last 60 foot, every last ET out of your truck, you're always going to be able to do that a little bit better with a trans brake than you are a foot brake. And the level of change, how much you're going to gain, depends on your horsepower level and the, do you have an ET truck or do you have a Pro Street truck? Because an ET truck, you're probably not going to gain anything with going to a trans brake. But Pro Street, I mean, you could pick up a half a tenth in the 60 foot. That's a tenth out the back. I mean, that's huge numbers at that point. So you need to consider what you're doing, what class it is, and that'll kind of determine that. But generally, four-wheel drive, you can get away with no trans brake. Two-wheel drive, you need to have a trans brake. Common rail, you're going to have a remote tuner. Some of these guys, you can tune them yourself if you really want to spend the time to learn it. But honestly, get a good tuner. Spend the money. There's tons of good tuners out there. For the racing stuff, Ryan Milliken, Ben Shaddy, Levon. I'm missing a bunch. But those are just ones off the top of my head. There's a bunch of guys out there that do a really good job tuning. Get with one of those guys. Let them do the tune-up. If you're building a common rail engine, kind of have the foresight of what tuner you're going to run. And don't be afraid to call those people and say, hey, This is the combination of parts that I'm wanting to run. What do you think? Because a lot of these tuners have experience with different brand injectors, and some of these guys prefer a certain brand over another brand. And if you're going to have them doing the tuning, it's always best to have them tell you what they would recommend. I know like Ryan works closely with Freedom, Levon works closely with D&J, where you can say, hey, this, I'm going to have a D&J this motor, and Levon's like, okay, what fuel system? And then they can put a tune together for you. Same with Ryan. You can tell, okay, we're going to run, these pistons. All right, that's what I want to run, and establish that relationship with the tuner. So that way you don't just come in out of left field with a bunch of oddball parts that these guys are starting from scratch with, essentially. It's going to save you money in the long run. A lot of these tuners are tuning you or charging you based on the time that it takes. If they can take a tune out of, say, Derek Rose's truck and stick it in JP's truck, like, that's a ton of time that they save because, oh, he's got the same injectors, he's got a similar engine combination. Okay, no problem. Boom. Time saved on their end is money saved on your end. Not to mention all of the free data that you're getting with that. I mean, they've spent, most tuners have spent hours and hours working on a combination together. So if you pick the same parts that they want you to run, you're essentially getting hours of tuning time for free because it's already been figured out with somebody else's combination. So I would absolutely recommend picking a tuner before you build an engine, and maybe talk to several tuners. If you're on the fence who you want to use, talk to both of them. See what you think. If you've got an engine shop picked out and that's the shop you want to use, maybe pick a tuner that's comfortable with that shop, or vice versa. If you've got a tuner you for sure want to use, talk to them. Use that to make your decision on an engine shop. Anytime you can take advantage of somebody else's time, spent, it's going to be good for you in the long run. It's going to be cheaper. And then with the 12 valve stuff, I'm partial to Scheid. I think those guys do an awesome job. Really, nobody's been doing it longer than them. They're kind of the godfathers of diesel racing, diesel performance. In my opinion, if you're going to build a mechanical engine, call those guys. Kent up there in the engine shop, he's done a ton of engines. He really knows his stuff. Obviously, Dan's the man. Jared Jones has a ton of drag racing experience he can help you with. That's a good mechanical shop that understands the drag racing, not just making the horsepower. That's something to really think about when you're talking mechanical, because 3,000 horsepower super stock pulling engine won't even work on the drag strip. You would be very unhappy with your results if you tried to do that. So it's definitely good to use some guys that have some real life drag racing experience. So pretty much that's all I got for this second choice here. Figure out if you're going 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. Figure out if you're going common rail or mechanical, and have fun dealing with your bullshit. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.